Welcome to the We Know Ball podcast, episode 105. We are into the month of December, and this is peak ball knowledge time on the calendar. Men's college basketball, NBA, college football, NFL, MLB free agency. We've got it all, and we're going to discuss all of it because there's a ton to discuss between last week's episode and this week's episode. Last week, we weren't able to put out a Thursday episode. We're going to do that this week. We had Thanksgiving last week. So much sports going on. I don't even know where to begin. And yet I do, because I've got a plan and we know ball on this show. So stick around for episode 105. Like I said, college basketball, NBA, college football, playoff rankings, and conference championship week is fastly approaching. And then, of course, the NFL. We have a new frontrunner in the NFL for MVP, potentially, or at least it's a two-horse race. College football playoff is going to be a disaster in the best way possible. It's going to be absolute anarchy come time for the final college football playoff rankings. And this time next week, we will know who's in the playoff and who's not. Pretty wild, pretty crazy to consider. I'll give you all my takes, all my thoughts on everything in between all those topics and much more. So stick around for episode 105 of the We Know Ball podcast. Let's get into it.
We know ball. First and goal. Mahomes flings it. It's there! Hardman! Jackpot! Kansas City! It's over. Time to say it again, Boston. Anything's possible. Banner number 18 has been secured. The Celtics are NBA champions.
I mean, we know that we know ball around here.
Hail, hail, Michigan. They are the champions of college football 2023.
Start the party, Los Angeles. Your Dodgers have won the World Series.
It is a UConn coronation. The Huskies make history. Back-to-back national champions.
Well, we know ball also.
You heard him. We say it every time, but we know ball. Let's go, man. First episode of December. We're into December. It's wild, man. Welcome. We Know Ball. It's the We Know Ball podcast. My name is Ryan. At Ryan Knows Ball. That's my Twitter X handle, if you will. At Ryan Knows Ball. At We Know Ball Sports. That's Instagram and that's TikTok. Ryan Knows Ball. We Know Ball Sports. This is the We Know Ball podcast. Episode 105. Also check us out on YouTube if you haven't already. We got a lot to discuss, man. We have everything under the sun in the world of sports. I know baseball's not going on, but we do have baseball to touch on this show. College basketball, into the swing of it, man. Like, college basketball is not, we're not in the early stages, non-conference, ego boosting part of the schedule where the good teams play the garbage teams or the low level D1. You know what I mean? Like, college basketball, we've had marquee premier matchups. NBA is into December. College football regular season is done. Like, it's done. That's insane. College football regular season is done. That's wild to talk about. Conference championships are coming up for college football. And then, of course, the NFL, which, yes, it's December, but there is still a lot of time left in the NFL schedule. So we'll get into all of it, and we're going to start with college basketball. Okay. Now, there's not a ton to touch on. If you looked at just like standings, or you looked at where each team is, the rankings, if you will, the BPI, the best way to kind of determine a team's overall success, overall value, the power index in college basketball. Now, we don't have AP top 25 to go off of, and frankly, I don't think that's incredibly relevant. It is relevant because that's the rankings that they put up. But the BPI is also tough because we sit here now and we look at the BPI rankings, and they've got Duke as the number one BPI team in all of college basketball, and yet their win-loss record is 5-2. Then you got Tennessee behind them, who is undefeated at 7-0, and Tennessee's number 2 in BPI ranking. So I think it does, it favors better teams no matter what, and strength of schedule, is considered into the factor of this. But the main thing I wanted to talk about, and we'll go through the BPI really quick, but according to ESPN, the BPI Power Index, they've got Duke at 1, Tennessee 2, Houston 3, Auburn 4, Gonzaga 5, Kansas 6, Alabama 7, Kentucky 8, Iowa State 9, Illinois 10, and UConn at 11. Quickly to touch on Auburn, okay? So somehow, some way, Auburn is at 4 in the BPI rankings, 7-0, and they're behind Houston, even though they beat Houston head-to-head. They win against, they blow out a team early, and then they play number 4 Houston team in their second game of the season, and they beat them. They play Kent State, they play North Alabama. Then they go to the Maui Invitational. They beat number 5 Iowa State. They beat number 12 North Carolina, and then they beat Memphis. So they're 7-0. They have 3 top 12 wins already. And somehow, according to the ESPN BPI, they're still the 4th best team behind Duke, who has 2 losses, and Houston, a team they already beat. What's going on? Now, I'm sure they don't care. And I'm sure as the rankings come out, they may be 1 or close to 1 in the AP top 25. But Auburn looks like the team to beat right now. Additionally, okay, as you reflect on the first couple of weeks of college basketball, you've got now, some teams 7, 8, close to 10 games under their belt. I think the most notable of the teams, especially in the Maui Invitational and how those things went, is the UConn Huskies, the team coming off back-to-back national championships, who now stare down the barrel of a 5-3 record, 3 consecutive losses at the Maui Invitational. And for me, it's not necessarily about maybe the disappointing performance early on for UConn. It's not like they're frauds. It's not all this different stuff. UConn's going to be in the tournament pretty much automatically, right? Pretty much automatically. Even if they have a mediocre season, right? They come in, they're middle of the pack. They're going to get the benefit of the doubt. They're going to get an at-large bid if for whatever reason they don't win their conference. And I still think they're a good basketball team. But 3 consecutive losses at the Maui Invitational to Memphis, Colorado, and Dayton. 3 unranked losses. Now, granted, they lose to Memphis by 2, Colorado by 1. Like, that's tight. Those are tight margins of loss and win and victory and whatever you want to say. Okay. I think my biggest issue is the situation with Dan Hurley, the UConn head coach. Now, UConn has turned itself into, of course, and has always been very, very prevalent at the top of college basketball. A prestigious program. They have a ton of NBA alumni. And Dan Hurley, after an amount of time for UConn where they were back towards the middle of the pack or weren't as relevant, Dan Hurley's brought them back into not only relevancy, but domination. Like, of course, back-to-back national championships is crazy. And that's good for him. But during the Maui Jim Invitational, or the Maui Invitational, whatever, I thought it was Maui Jim, but I guess it's just Maui now. You know, it's kind of a unique style tournament. And you've got UConn losing 3 in a row. And I'm trying to look up what MTE means. What does MTE mean in college basketball? Multi-team events. Yeah, that's what I knew it was, like multi something. But one thing you have to understand with Dan Hurley, with UConn, what's going on, okay? I'll pose it as a question, and that's kind of the theme and direction we've started to go with this show, is to put out an open-ended question and answer that question with our take on the situation. Are Dan Hurley's antics as the head coach of UConn warranted, appropriate, and necessary for what he's trying to get accomplished as a head coach? My argument is not even close to appropriate and definitely not necessary. Dan Hurley is a great coach, probably the best coach in college basketball at the moment. He's a great recruiter. He's super intense. His practices are crazy, and I have no problem with any of that stuff. We've seen documentary stuff on it. We've seen 60-minute features on him and the intensities of the practice, and that's how you ultimately create championship caliber team and a championship culture. And he's done all those things. He's cultivated that, and he has brought UConn back to prominence. And I think he knows what I'm about to say, but in a team sport with officials, with referees who can impact the outcome of games based on their judgment, Dan Hurley's antics during the game, as his teams start to falter a little bit, as they start to struggle, as they trail on the scoreboard, Dan Hurley's antics aren't doing his team a justice or a service. I'll put it this way. Dan Hurley's antics are ultimately doing his own team a disservice. And it's not the intensity factor. It's not that he's demanding excellence. It's not the high expectations of his players. It's that they're losing on the scoreboard. There's a judgment call made by one of the officials. And his innate ability to make an enemy out of every single official in a tight or close game ultimately doesn't help his team in the remainder of that game and in long term of the season. Because when you lose, and you lose close, and all you're seen doing, or the only takeaway from the games is, oh, there's Dan Hurley seemingly throwing a fit again on the sideline, complaining about the officiating, losing his mind over a 50-50 call, it comes across as whining, complaining, and kind of loserish. And that's outside of what Dan Hurley actually is. But it does damage to himself and the team as the season goes on, when it looks like he's literally just whining and complaining. Not to mention, as a coach with an officiating crew, whether it's direct and the officials are actually consciously thinking of it, or if it's just subconsciously, officials are not going to give your team the benefit of the doubt when now the coach has made an enemy out of the officials during the game. And if it's 4 minutes into the game, it's a 50-50 call, 2 guys go up, and one of his defenders, one of UConn's players, goes up for the block and gets called for the foul. And Dan Hurley is beside himself, throwing a fit on the bench. You think that ref's going to give the UConn players the benefit of the doubt the rest of the game? No, I don't mind Dan Hurley sticking up for his guys. And I understand that's mostly what he's doing, is defending his players. But when it's like 50-50, it's a judgment call. It's not like some crazy, blatantly obvious, horrendously skewed call. And it's just a 50-50. And Dan Hurley is throwing a tantrum on the bench. It's not going to help his team the rest of the game. And then if they go on to lose and it becomes a consistent pattern of behavior, which I understand that's how Dan Hurley is. It's how he carries himself. High intensity, high emotion. But when you lose, it comes across as whining and complaining. It's not a great look. He's a high-intensity guy. He demands excellence out of his players. He demands excellence, frankly, out of everybody involved in every game UConn plays. I get it. But when you're throwing tantrums early in the game, any point in the game, do you think that's going to help your guys? So for Dan Hurley, there needs to be some calibration. And his antics and stuff... Are Dan Hurley's antics I don't even know, like, is there another word for antics? Because antics makes it seem like it's unwarranted, like it's completely unnecessary. I'll put it this way. Are Dan Hurley's antics on the sideline and on the bench beneficial and necessary for his team's success? The answer ultimately is no. While he demands a lot, he demands excellence from his team, while he has high expectations for his players and demands excellence, ultimately, there needs to be more of a calibration. I'm not asking him to be easier on his guys. I'm not asking him to be softer. It's not about that. It's not about demanding excellence from your guys. It's about how it comes across when A, he's losing, and B, they're coming off back-to-back national championships. There's this... It gives off entitlement. It gives off lack of accountability, and ultimately not a grand scale understanding of when you're hammering an official in the first 2 minutes of the game on a 50-50 call where your guy gets called for the foul and you're losing your marbles on the bench. How do you think that's going to impact how 50-50 calls go the rest of the game? And Dan Hurley knows this. And I understand he's sticking up for his guys. He's defending his players. But there has to be a calibration. We can't have UConn in a tight game or down and not playing up to their best. And lo and behold, in the last 3 minutes of the game or in a crunch time situation, Dan Hurley's getting held back by his coaches on the sideline on the bench. It's not a good look. It comes across as kind of complainy, kind of whiny, with a little bit of entitlement behind it because, oh, we're UConn and we're back-to-back national champions. Like he's going to get some different or special treatment. Like the referees aren't out to get you, Dan Hurley. That's the point. They're not showing up and thinking, how can we screw over UConn? But that's how it comes across when it's Dan Hurley doing it. And oh, by the way, nobody else. Like no other coaches are red in the face, getting held back, losing their mind every game. Dan Hurley's an excellent coach. He's an amazing coach, actually. And he demands excellence from his guys. He's high intensity, and he's built a champion over at UConn. And I'm not asking him to dial it back in any of those categories. What I'm saying is somehow he's got to learn to calibrate, because it's ultimately doing more damage than it is good. It's bringing more negative than positive. He's got to dial it back. Not to mention, after he goes over to the Maui Invitational, and loses 3 straight games. He comes back and goes, well, we're never playing in one of those multi-event games, tournaments ever again. We're never playing in that. It's not a good look, man. It's not a good look. And frankly, I'm kind of sick of it. I'm kind of sick of seeing, oh, there's UConn, who's a great team. One of the favorites to win the national championship. They got a bunch of great players. They got a few returning guys. A great and intense head coach in Dan Hurley who demands excellence and gets it out of his guys. Oh, great. Oh, but they're losing. Oh, and look, there's a clip of Dan Hurley literally freaking out on the sideline. Like, calibrate, Dan Hurley. You need to calibrate better. I'm not asking you to be any less intense or demand anything less than from your players. But the referees aren't out to get you. Like, they're not out. They don't show up and think, let's screw UConn over. That's not how this thing works. So, anyways, that's my diatribe on college basketball and Dan Hurley. And by the way, that doesn't even necessarily go for just Dan Hurley. He's the most recent case of this and the most prominent case. But that's for any coach and any official, any situation like this. Like, you can't just go ballistic on officials who make judgment calls and expect it to be a positive impact on your team, because it's just not going to be. It's just not going to be. So that's college hoops, man. We went through the power index rankings, and that's where we stand. To continue the track in basketball, move on to the NBA. NBA, storylines. Victor Wembanyama's playing pretty well. As we take a look at the standings here, the Cavaliers have dropped a couple more games. It's starting to tighten up just a touch. The Celtics are now a game and a half behind the Cleveland Cavaliers for the top seed in the Eastern Conference. Things are starting to look a little bit better in the Eastern Conference in the top 6. But then as you head towards the 8, 9, and 10, which are all teams playing postseason basketball in the Eastern Conference, they're all at least 3 games below 500. That's not good. It's a tough look. And I saw another clip, the diminishment of the NBA. Why is the NBA dropping in ratings and declining in popularity? If you want to know, it's because the league and coaches and players and the analytics of all the NBA constituents have found out that the 3-pointer is worth more than the 2-pointer. Rebounding is optional. Mid-range jumpers are optional. Playing defense is optional at best. And the full-length clip I saw on social media not too long ago between, who was it? It's like the Lakers and the Suns. Lakers are down by 15 or 20 points. And it's a 2.5 or 3 minute stretch of game action where it's literally just jacking 3 after 3 after 3 after 3. No offensive rebounding. None. Every guy on every possession for both teams is just sitting on the perimeter. Typically, a guy ends up getting left open, jacks a 3, misses it. Now, it's a 2 or 3 minute clip of game where nobody makes a shot, which makes it look a lot worse. But offensive rebounding doesn't exist. Defense doesn't exist. And the NBA at this point just become a glorified 3-on-3 3-point competition with defense optional. And it's like pickup basketball. Like, what's the difference? Truthfully, what is the difference between the NBA in 2024 and your local pickup basketball game at a rec gym? And the only difference is how tall the guys are. and maybe a touch of athleticism in certain spurts in the NBA. Otherwise, they're both glorified shoot around, 3-point competition, defense optional, offensive rebounding optional, jack as many threes as you can, and hope that they go in. Mid-range disappeared. I don't know, just like overarching offensive strategy, play design. And if there is strategy or play design, it's designed around trying to get somebody open behind the arc so he can shoot a three. And that 2-minute clip I saw of the Suns and Lakers was a complete joke. It was a complete joke. Like, if you're wondering why the NBA is declining, it's the exact thing. Not to mention, one side of the NBA conference consideration on the Eastern Conference has 4 good teams and the rest are trash. Like, what do you expect? Right? So that's the NBA, man. We'll move on to baseball real quick. And we'll talk some contract deferrals and stuff like that. So, or free agency. So the Dodgers signed Blake Snell. 6 years, 105 years, 182 million. Something along those lines. 182 million total, whatever. And the biggest talking point, it's not that they signed Blake Snell, it's that they signed him and deferred a bunch of money again. And after the signing of Blake Snell and the deferrals, people are able to tally up the total deferrals. I'll put it this way, is what the Dodgers are doing bad for baseball? And the answer is unequivocally yes. The answer is yes, yes, and yes again. Not just with their ability to build a super team, but the way they're going about it financially with all deferred money on the back end of seemingly every big contract they have. You got Ohtani signed for $700 million, $680 million of that deferred money. Mookie Betts, $365 million contract, $115 or a third of it is deferred. Blake Snell now, $182 million, $62 million or a third deferred. Freddie Freeman, $162 million, $57 million or a third of it deferred. Will Smith, $140 million, $50 million of that or just over a third of it deferred. And everyone says, oh, well, what about all those other deferred contracts? What about all these guys that also signed deferred money? Max Scherzer got deferred. The Dodgers have $964 million of deferred payments committed since July of 2020. So yeah, there's some other guys in the MLB that have deferred contracts or deferred money worked into their contract. But for reference, $964 million deferred that they've committed to since 2020 for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And for reference, every other deferral attached to an active MLB contract adds up to $271 million. Strasburg's getting $80 million on one team in the Nationals. Devers is getting $75 million on the Red Sox, rather. Like, all these guys, the rest of the league, when you add up all the deferred money, it only adds up to $271 million. And that's across all of Major League Baseball in terms of active contracts. Yeah, there's some guys that are no longer playing that are getting deferred money. Sure. But in terms of active guys with committed deferred money, it's $271 million. The Dodgers active right now have $964 million committed to deferred payments. Active on their team right now. Major League Baseball needs to step in. Is it bad what the Dodgers are doing? Are the Dodgers damaging the sport of baseball? Yes. Because if they go on to dominate and win repeatedly every year, win 110, 120, always seemingly in play for every single big free agent. It's not good for baseball. It is alienating other fan bases. Yes, the small market teams need to spend more money. The owners are cheap. 100% agree. Let's put in a salary floor. Otherwise, you're forced to sell the team. Totally agree with that. But if you're expecting a team in Seattle, a team in Cincinnati, a team in Tampa Bay to compete and be able to spend north of $350, $400 million a year on their team, it simply cannot happen. Not to mention the Dodgers signing every guy they can and deferring a third, half, or in Shohei's case, 98% of the contract. It's absolutely horrendous for baseball. The reason they have a competitive balance tax, baseball's version of the salary cap, is to try in some way to level the playing field, to make it so that certain teams don't spend, I don't know, $300 million more in their payroll than other teams in the exact same league. But when you defer money, it's a way to at least minimize the damage on the competitive balance tax and then make you more competitive for as many free agents as you possibly can sign. Salary cap, I'm not sure. I'd say it's probably better than the competitive balance tax in terms of keeping things competitive. That being said, the deferred money thing is a complete joke. Major League Baseball has to step in. The Dodgers have almost $1 billion committed to deferred payments on their active roster right now. And everyone says, oh, well, other guys have deferred money. Max Scherzer has deferred. This guy has deferred. Yeah, there's some guys that aren't playing anymore, that are old, that are like 40 plus years old getting deferred money. Yes, okay, I get it. But active players in the MLB right now, across the entire league, outside of the Dodgers, there's only $271 million committed to active players in deferred money after these guys are done playing. The Dodgers have almost $1 billion right now. Active. Shohei, Mookie, Freddie, Will Smith, Blake Snell. They signed Tommy Edman to an extension, and there's deferred money. Stop letting them do that. They can't. Because their revenue is always going to be higher than everybody else's. They're in the biggest market, or arguably the biggest market in Major League Baseball. They got Ohtani. They basically have the support of an entire international country in Japan for their team alone. So their revenue is always going to be higher than everybody else's. So they can afford to pay these guys, especially with deferred money. So limit the deferred money and let's make things a little bit more competitive. Otherwise, you're just alienating every other fan base. I'm a Padres fan. Should the Padres be spending more because they generated a ton of revenue last year? Yes, absolutely. Can the Padres afford to pay their team close to $400 million with an additional tax slotted on top of that because of going over the competitive balance tax threshold? Can they afford to do that? No, they cannot. And that's the Padres, a team that's in a decent sized market, a team that generated a ton of revenue, and a team that's fielding already a competitive roster with a ton of guys on big contracts. What about teams in Tampa Bay, teams in Cincinnati, teams in Seattle, teams in Arizona? Like, what are they supposed to do? There's no chance. There's no way. It makes zero sense for the Dodgers to be able to go out last offseason and commit $1 billion to two players, come back this offseason after winning the World Series and seemingly be in on and make a competitive offer to every big free agent. Already signed Blake Snell, have an offer out for Juan Soto, have in on Corbin Burns and Max Fried and Teoscar Hernandez. Like, it can't, that's not competitive. Baseball has a competitive balance tax. Clearly, it's not keeping things competitive. Salary floor in baseball? Yeah, absolutely. Make it a minimum. I don't know. 40%, 50% of your annual revenue. Something like that. Right? Sure. Or, make it a baseline number. You have to pay your team at least $120 million a year. Otherwise, you're forced to sell because you're a cheap guy who's operating on profits only. Got it. But a salary cap? I don't know if you absolutely need it, but then make the competitive balance tax thresholds more serious. Make them more harsh. If you spend over $320 million on your team, every single dollar you spend over $320 million, you're taxed on it and have to pay it back to the league at a 300% clip. It's going to de-incentivize teams to go absolutely outrageously ballistic. Not to mention, you're only allowed to have up to, let's say, $200 million on your team committed in deferred payments. Anything above that, you're taxed at a 250% rate for every dollar you have deferred. Over 200 million. Only 200 million. Like, give me a break. The Dodgers have $964 billion committed in deferred money only. Not total payment, not total contract situation, just deferred money. That's absolutely disgusting. It's sickening, and it's making baseball super uncompetitive, and it's discouraging for every other fan base besides Dodger fans. It sucks. I hate it. And when the Dodgers ultimately sign another monster free agent this year, it's going to make the incentive for baseball fans to watch not just the regular season, but especially the playoffs completely irrelevant. It's going to come down to a point where, the only way we compete with the Dodgers is if this guy, and this guy somehow or another aren't available in the postseason due to injury, due to some other unforeseen circumstance. And that's not what I want to root for. I don't want to root for guys to get hurt so my team can be competitive. That's not very fun. So what are we doing? Limit the deferred money, put a harsher competitive balance tax penalty on these teams, or a salary cap while you put in a salary floor, and make things a little more competitive. Because otherwise, the Dodgers are going to build an all-star team and defer every dollar they possibly can while nobody else can compete. That seems like a fun business strategy for Major League Baseball. Oh, wait, it's not, and it's going to lead to the league's demise. Awesome. As a baseball fan, love that. All right, man, moving on. Moving on to football. So, yeah, moving on to football. College football. We're going to go through the top 25, and we're going to do it in order of days of the week, and then we're going to do it in terms of ranking. So, on Thursday, aka Thanksgiving, Memphis played at number 17 Tulane, and Memphis beat Tulane. Tulane was 17. They were like kind of in consideration for the top 12, but ultimately they choked and they're going to drop. So Tulane loses on Thanksgiving. On Friday, we had some pretty wild games. So Friday evening, you had number 7 Georgia hosting Georgia Tech. Now it's a non-conference game, but it's a rivalry game, obviously in state. They went to 8 overtimes. Now, I don't want to discredit the fact that it went to 8 overtimes, but the overtime periods after the second overtime were just 2-point conversion tries. So you're running 2 plays every overtime period, right? It's not. Anyways, it goes to 8 overtimes. Georgia prevails. Everybody knows that. They won 44-42. They were number 7 coming into that game. I'd imagine they hang around that same spot. I'm not entirely sure. It was a really long, emotionally draining game for a team like Georgia, who has to go to Atlanta this weekend and play in the SEC championship. But it was non-conference, so they were in the SEC championship regardless. But it's emotionally draining, and it could have had a potential impact on the college football playoff. Now, it probably doesn't as much, at least until the SEC championship. But Georgia beats Georgia Tech on Friday night. Number 11 Boise State played Oregon State in a quasi old Pac-12 Mountain West weird game. I guess they're rivals. I don't really know. I know Oregon State's the bigger one, but they're in different conferences now. Anyways, Boise State at 11 beats Oregon State 34-18. Ashton Jeanty has another big game. He's probably going to be a Heisman finalist and lose to Travis Hunter. We'll get to it here in just a second. In the Egg Bowl, number 14 Ole Miss hosted Mississippi State and beat them 26-14. Ole Miss beats Mississippi State by 12 points. Mississippi State is 2-10, 0-8 in the SEC. So that's not a good win for Ole Miss, a team that's looking to try to get into the 12-team playoff with 3 losses. In my opinion, Ole Miss has absolutely no business getting anywhere near the college football playoff, especially with 3 losses. They've had some ugly wins. They've had some bad losses. I don't think they deserve it. I don't think they should be anywhere near the top 12 or even remotely in consideration for the college football playoff. And then finally on Friday, number 25 Colorado with Shadur Sanders, Deion, Travis, etc. They hosted Oklahoma State. And they beat them 52-0. Travis Hunter had a big game. Travis Hunter is going to win the Heisman Trophy. I think he deserves it. I think it'll be close. I think it should be close with Ashton Jeanty. I think Ashton's offensive numbers are better than Travis Hunter's defensive number. Nope. Run it back. I think Travis Hunter's offensive numbers aren't as good as Ashton Jeanty's, but the fact that he played defense ultimately, I think that's the determining. I just think it's better. I think that's what makes it a pretty big deal. To quickly touch on this before, and I'm sorry, I was looking at Travis Hunter's stats there really quick. Before we go to Saturday's action, since the two frontrunners for Heisman competed on Friday, I'll touch on this quickly. Who should win the Heisman this year? The answer is Travis Hunter. Ashton Jeanty, historically great season. Maybe one of the best ever from a running back in college football history. Couple things to consider. Number one, it's the Mountain West. Okay, I know it's football. I get it. I understand. It's easy to just say if he was in this conference, the numbers would be different. I get it. All we have for reference is what his numbers were, and they were historically great. And if you put his offensive numbers up against Travis Hunter's offensive numbers, it's not close, and Jeanty takes it away easily. The difference maker is Travis Hunter played defense. And he got interceptions. He played a great cornerback position. And if I were to rank them out, their full seasons on a 0 to 100 scale, kind of like a Madden rating, if you will, Ashton Jeanty's season, for me, gets like a 94 out of 100. It's not higher because it's the Mountain West, and he only played offense. And if you only rank Travis Hunter's offensive season, I give him an 87 out of 100. Had a great year as a receiver, over 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns. Great year. Jeanty's is better, but Travis Hunter played defense, and he played the hardest position to play on defense, which is corner. And he had 4 interceptions. So if you rank his entire contributions as a football player, which by the way is the award, Heisman Trophy, the best football player of the season. Ashton Jeanty, his season's a 94 out of 100. Travis Hunter's entire season, offensive and defensive contributions, is probably a 96. It's really tight. It's really close. The misconception is, I think Travis Hunter should win. That means I hate Ashton Jeanty and think he's a worthless piece of garbage. Nope. That's not the argument. Ashton Jeanty, historically great, going to be an unbelievable football player and have an amazing, illustrious career. Travis Hunter had a slightly better season and should be the Heisman Trophy winner. Both great, both insane, both outstanding. Travis Hunter should win. Moving on to Saturday's action. Again, we'll go through the rankings. Number 1, Oregon played Washington at home, beat them 49-21. Their consensus number 1 team in the country, the only undefeated team in the country. 12-0, 9-0 in the conference. Had a phenomenal season. Congratulations to them. They will be playing Penn State in the Big Ten Championship. They're playing Penn State because number 2, Ohio State, played Michigan at home and lost 13-10. Absolutely embarrassing performance for Ohio State at home. Embarrassing, despicable. I have no affiliations with Ohio State whatsoever, so I'm not saying this as an Ohio State fan. For them to lose to Michigan at home when Michigan doesn't have a quarterback at home, it's such a joke. At Ohio State, it's so bad. It's so bad. To score 10 points is so bad. Will Howard, after putting out Indiana's cigarette last week, it's so embarrassing. Now, they don't play in the Big Ten Championship, and ultimately it may benefit them because they can't go into the Big Ten Championship and lose and post a 3rd loss. But dude, it's so bad. It's so bad, man. It just can't happen. But yeah, Ohio State at number 2, they lose. They're going to drop substantially. I don't know where they're going to end up at the final rankings, but I imagine they're close to 9 or 10, somewhere in there, which is really skating on thin ice. Number 3, Texas went to Texas A&M, beat them 17-7. Kind of an underwhelming game. Texas A&M is always filled with a ton of hype and then ultimately just finds the best possible ways to look like complete garbage. They didn't score an offensive touchdown in this game. Their attention to detail, their special teams, everything. It's a joke. They just had a pick 6. That's how they scored. Texas A&M is always full of hype, high budget, high intensity, always gets a ton of love. They were able to host game day twice this year, and both times they lost. They're a joke. I'll be nicer. I don't mean to go that hard on them. It's hard for me with Texas A&M because every year they get a ton of hype. Every year they get ranked in the top 25. Every year they have a top recruiting class. Every year they have the top budget. And every year they lose 4+ games. Every year. Every year. Is Texas A&M the most... Yes, I'll say this. Is Texas A&M the most overhyped and overrated program potentially in college football history? I'd say they're in the running. I'd say absolutely in the running to be considered as one of the most overrated programs in the history of college football. And I mean overrated in, you got teams every year that seemingly come into the season and they get put in the top 25. Every year they come in, they got a great recruiting class. Every year they come in, they got a huge budget. And then they go out and they just look terrible. They lose 4 games and they end up being a middle of the pack team. You could put like Notre Dame sometimes in that group, Miami sometimes in that group, USC sometimes in that group. But Texas A&M is the team that consistently, for me, it's like they start in the top 20, top 25. They play a top 25 team. They lose. Then they go throughout the season. They start stacking wins against average opponents. All of a sudden, with 2 losses, for some reason, they find their way back into the top 25. And they're featured in another primetime game towards the end of the season. Then they play a top 25 team, and then they lose again. It's like every year. Every year. They get college game day twice this season. At home, they lose both of those games. And every year, they just top recruiting class, biggest budget in college football, all these things. And they lose 4 games. It's like every year with Texas A&M. So until they're literally at the last week of the regular season and they're undefeated or maybe 1 loss against the other best team in the country, I'm never, ever, 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 ever going to take Texas A&M seriously. Never. I am never going to do it. Not to mention all the other antics and extracurriculars that fan base does that we see footage of before the games, the night before, the whatever you want to call that stuff, man, with their hype guys and whatever they got going. I don't even know the terminology that they prefer. I don't even want to know it. It's weird. Gives off weird vibes. And ultimately, the football team on the field loses 4 games at least every single season. So overhyped, overrated every year? Yes, unequivocally. Number 4, Penn State. We mentioned them. They played Maryland and beat them 44-7. So Penn State is 11-1, 8-1 in the Big Ten, and they're going to be playing against Oregon in the Big Ten championship. They're going to lose to Oregon because they don't have good quarterback play, and Oregon does. Oregon's dynamic on both sides of the ball. Penn State is not dynamic on both sides of the ball, so they're ultimately going to lose. My final score predictions are 31-14. That's going to be my final prediction. Number 5, Notre Dame played USC, had a little bit of a scare, but ultimately beat them 49-35. Notre Dame is 11-1. They're number 5. They cannot be a top 4 seed, but they're going to be in the playoff. So good for them. Number 6, Miami at 10-1 at the time, went to Syracuse, loses to Syracuse 42-38. Miami's going to drop substantially. How far they drop is going to be the question. But they are not playing in the ACC championship. If they would have won that game, they would have been. Now they are not going to. And who knows? Maybe that helps. Maybe that hurts. We'll find out. We mentioned number 7 was Georgia. Number 8, Tennessee. Went to Vanderbilt for the little Tennessee rivalry there. Beat them 36-23. Kind of had a scare there at the beginning of that game and then opened up a little bit. So they're going to be in the playoff in some capacity. Number 9, SMU. They beat Cal. They are going to the ACC championship. Seemingly, I would imagine SMU is in the playoff no matter what, but you never know. If they go in this ACC championship and get blown out by Clemson for whatever reason, that may hurt them. We'll find out. Number 10, Indiana beats Purdue 66-0. And they're number 10. They're not playing in the Big Ten championship, so I would imagine they get in the playoff as well, but we'll find out. Probably the most interesting result of the weekend was number 15, South Carolina, playing number 12, Clemson, beating them 17-14. Now, both teams are 9-3. Clemson, again, is going into the ACC championship. I wouldn't say it's a must-win, but I would say it's a must-win for them against SMU. Otherwise, they'll have 4 losses. That, no matter what, is just not great. South Carolina, 9-3. They're not playing in the SEC championship, but they should be in consideration for the top 12 in the college football playoff. Auburn and Alabama in the Iron Bowl. Number 13, Alabama beats them 28-14. Alabama might sneak into the top 12. We'll find out. Number 16, Arizona State played Arizona, beat them 49-7. Iowa State played Kansas State, 18-24, beat them 29-21. Iowa State is in the Big 12 championship and has an opportunity to get into the college football playoff. That's very interesting. Number 19, BYU played Houston, beat them 30-18. 21, Missouri beat Arkansas 28-21. UNLV beat Nevada 38-24. They are in the Mountain West championship game against Boise State. Potential for UNLV to get into the college football playoff. And then number 23, Illinois played Northwestern, beat them 38-28. So we don't have college football playoff rankings yet, and we won't know until Thursday. We're going to go over those on that episode, but some interesting results. The conference championship games are as follows. On Friday, December 6th, number 22, and these are, I won't even read off the rankings because those are based on last week's. UNLV plays Boise State in the Mountain West Championship. Tulane plays Army in the AAC Championship. On Saturday morning, Iowa State plays Arizona State in the Big 12 Championship. In the afternoon, Georgia plays Texas in the SEC Championship. In the evening, you have 2 games going at the same time. Big 10 Championship, Penn State, Oregon, and Clemson and SMU in the ACC Championship. So you will know on Saturday night, by that time, who's in the playoff. You're going to know the SEC champion will be in, the Big 10 champion will be in, the Big 12 champion will be in, the ACC champion will be in. It's just a matter of the Mountain West or American Athletic Championship, probably going to be Boise State or UNLV between the two, but who knows? We'll find out. Yeah, so that's college football. Moving on. NFL. We had Thursday games, we have Friday games, we had Sunday games. Let's dive into it, talk the biggest and most important storylines. So the Lions beat the Bears on Thanksgiving, 23-20. The Bears had a disastrous last second mismanagement of the clock per usual. How does firing... Okay, so I'll put it this way. After they had that situation, the Bears fired their coach, Matt Eberflus. How does the midseason firing of Matt Eberflus affect Caleb Williams and the Bears situation moving forward? I think ultimately in the long term, it's going to be a positive because you saw Matt Eberflus, you saw the way he carried himself. You saw his weird obsession with trying to just look physically as suave and as cool as possible, trying to carry himself like a Mr. Cool guy, and refuses to take accountability for just countless mistakes that he made, both as a head coach, as a play caller, as an appointee of offensive coordinators, etc. Refuses to take timeouts, seemingly just doesn't understand what's going on the field of play, despite the fact that everybody else sees it clear as day. Everyone's looking at the clock and saying, hey man, take a timeout, take a timeout, take a timeout. Hey man, you should have more guys back. Hey, you shouldn't have given up 15 yards to let them throw a Hail Mary. And he refuses to take accountability for it. So getting rid of him in the long term is going to be the better choice. In terms of Caleb Williams, it's going to hurt him again. And these teams take these quarterbacks first overall and address no other issues. Maybe they add a receiver or a running back, and they go, all right, well, let's go to the playoffs. That's not how this thing works. The Panthers did it with Bryce Young. The Bears have done it time and time again with Trubisky, with Justin Fields, now with Caleb Williams. If the Bears want Caleb Williams to be the guy and he's shown flashes of greatness, go out, do everything you possibly can, do all the due diligence necessary, get the guy that's going to culturally change the organization as a head coach, and then every other resource you have, allocate that towards offensive linemen. That's it. Go out and get the best guys you can. Spend every penny you have on offensive linemen. Draft as many as you can. Protect your quarterback. Otherwise, it's going to be the same thing. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And frankly, I think the Bears winning the first few games of this season did more damage to Caleb Williams than anything else, because it kept Matt Eberflus around longer than he should have been. And the Bears have the recipe for how can we screw things up and keep this perpetual disaster cycle going of GM, coach, quarterback, GM, coach, quarterback, GM, coach, quarterback, GM, coach, quarterback, to a point where now Caleb might be in trouble. I think he'll be okay. I think everyone recognized what the issues were. The offensive play caller, now the head coach. It's not the players. It's the protection. It's the play calling. Now for the Bears, get a guy, establish it, go protect your QB. Lions, on the other hand, by the way, 23-20 win. They're 11-1. The Lions looked a little more human in this game, having to play a pretty prominent defense that the Bears have, but that's the Lions, man, finding a way to win. They still kind of scare me. They still have their weird, streaky periods of like lack of production. I don't know. The other games on Thanksgiving, Cowboys hosted the Giants, beat them 27-20 in the Poop Bowl. The Packers hosted the Dolphins and beat them 30-17. Dolphins season's certainly not over by any means. They're 5-7. They have some reasonable, games to potentially win as you look ahead on their schedule, but 5-7 is not great. The Packers are doing what the Packers have always done, which is finding ways to win as well. So interesting in that sense. Packers are pretty solid, and if they get some home field games, into the postseason, I wouldn't be surprised to see them make a run at the NFC Championship and challenge the Lions to some degree. Those guys are playing on Thursday Night Football, by the way, so keep that in mind. Black Friday football, Chiefs hosted the Raiders, beat them 19-17. The Chiefs, once again, didn't play very well. Patrick Mahomes didn't play outstanding. Didn't have a ton of big-time offensive performance overall. And again, they just win the game. The Raiders were driving down the field, had the ball in field goal range, snapped the ball on a miscommunication between center and quarterback, ended up being a penalty for the Raiders and having a 10-second runoff to end the game. And the Chiefs win on some weird black magic devil stuff again. In all seriousness, the Chiefs are very fundamentally sound. The Chiefs have a decent defense. And, again, we've talked about Mahomes time and time again as a guy who doesn't go out and make game-changing and game-losing decisions or throws as a quarterback. That being said, had to throw the ball 46 times, threw it for 306 yards and a touchdown. That was the only offensive touchdown of the game for the Kansas City Chiefs. According to the stats and metrics, Aiden O'Connell played better than Patrick Mahomes. Had more passing yards, more passing touchdowns, a better quarterback rating, a better passer rating. They ran for double the yards that the Chiefs did offensively. You got Brock Bowers had 10 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown. The Chiefs are the best team in the NFL at playing significantly worse than their opponent and still winning the game. Now, make of that what you'd like. I'm not saying the refs give the Chiefs every game. I'm not saying the NFL is rigged, but seemingly Mahomes has been able to accomplish what Tom Brady did time and time again in New England, which is, I don't know, I guess just for lack of a better term, they're hacking football. They control time of possession. They minimize penalties. They are fundamentally sound on special teams. They punt the ball well. They make their field goals. They don't turn the ball over. And in crunch time situations, they force the other team to make stupid decisions or falter in some capacity. With all those things considered and all that stuff being said, I don't know if that's ultimately a recipe for success to make a deep run in the playoffs. I know the Chiefs are 11-1, but the Chiefs statistically are the worst 11-1 team in NFL history. And that's based on point differential. I saw something somewhere. It was all the other teams that were 11-1, and the Chiefs have the lowest point differential of all those teams. Point being, I'm not scared of the Chiefs, and I don't think a lot of teams should be. You have to play fundamentally sound and take care of the football when you play the Chiefs, but they are beatable. They are beatable. And if you look ahead at their schedule, again, as they sit there at 11-1, they play the Chargers, who they could potentially lose to. They'll probably beat the Browns. They'll probably beat the Texans. But then you go at Steelers, at Broncos to end your season. I think those will be the most telling. And if they come out of there with wins in all those games, then they really do just have officially hacked it. But they're just like the least scary at 11-1 team in NFL history. Moving on to Sunday. Chargers Falcons. The Chargers went to Atlanta, beat the Falcons 17-13. Kirk Cousins threw four interceptions. One of his worst games in recent memory. Chargers and Jim Harbaugh, man, they find ways to win. Steelers played the Bengals. Steelers beat the Bengals 44-38. What is the box score for Joe Burrow? 309 yards, 3 touchdowns. And the team loses. Russell Wilson threw for 414 yards and 3 touchdowns as well. The Steelers win by scoring more points, which is weird because I know that's how you win. I'm saying like they had to outscore somebody, which is not typically style of play the Steelers are favorable in. However, the Bengals defense is atrocious, so that's how they lose. Cardinals played the Vikings in Minnesota. Vikings beat them by 1 point. Cardinals are 6-6. Vikings are 10-2. Vikings, again, always seem to find a way to win. Colts beat the Patriots in New England 25-24. Seahawks beat the Jets 26-21, and they are in first place in the AFC West, now clear by a full game. Titans played the Commanders, beat them. The Commanders beat the Titans 42-19. Titans are a joke. But they're rebuilding, and it is what it is. The Texans played the Jaguars, beat them 23-20. Really just brutal hit on Trevor Lawrence by Azeez Al-Shaair on the Texans. Can't happen. Shouldn't happen. Probably going to be suspended, I would imagine. Texans are 8-5 though. And it was an important win for the Texans. They needed that. And yeah. Rams played the Saints, beat them 21-14. Rams are 6-6. Saints are 4-8. Their season's over. Taysom Hill in this game tore his ACL. So he'll be out for a while. Very unfortunate. Rams are 6-6. They're still right there in the hunt. They're a game out of the division lead. Bucks played the Panthers in Carolina. Bucks beat the Panthers 26-23 in overtime. As it turns out, no. Let me pose it as a question. Is Bryce Young still a bust? Apparently not. And all it took was 4 or 5 games for Bryce Young in his second season to settle in a little bit, make some pretty good throws, win a game or two, lead his team on some game tying or go ahead drives late in the fourth quarter for people to realize, oh, maybe Bryce Young's lack of success early on in his NFL career wasn't entirely his fault. And then it's magnified when they play the Buccaneers. Bryce Young leads them down the field again, gives them the lead with literally like 33 seconds left, and the Panthers defense just can't stop the Bucs from getting into field goal range, tying the game at the end of regulation, and then going into overtime, and the Buccaneers get the ball first, miss a field goal. Bryce Young leads the team down the field again, and lo and behold, somebody besides Bryce Young causes his team to lose. Chuba Hubbard fumbles, Bucs get the ball back, kick a field goal, and win. Now, Chuba Hubbard has been great, and I'm not saying Chuba Hubbard is the sole reason the Panthers lost. However, to say Bryce Young is a bust because the Panthers weren't successful as a team, when organizationally speaking, they were a dumpster fire, have been a dumpster fire since their one successful run with Ron Rivera and Cam Newton, it's not Bryce Young's fault. And somehow, some way, people are just now realizing that because Bryce Young is, developed. It takes a little bit of time for guys to develop. It takes a little bit of time for quarterbacks to find success. Oh, especially on a team that is historically horrendous in terms of its roster construction. But Bryce Young's had 4 or 5 games in a row. CJ Stroud's had an average season this year. And people go, oh, maybe Bryce Young's not a bust. And maybe the Panthers being terrible and Bryce Young's numbers not being good wasn't entirely his fault. Wow. What a shocker. It's almost like a quarterback who's 5'10" needs a little bit of help around him. And despite that, Bryce Young has been making some elite throws, elite, high caliber throws in the last 5 or 6 weeks. But it's not all Bryce Young's fault. And by the way, he's not a bust. He was never going to be a bust. He just needed time. The bust caliber meter and the amount of time and the grace period for these guys has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller to a point now where it's like, dude. Eagles played the Ravens and beat them 24-19. This is a good football game between two good football teams. The Ravens are 8-5, and it's just like they should be better than that because they have so many dynamic weapons on their offense. But they seem to give up kind of bigger chunks than they should in some cases. Eagles win 24-19. And then the Bills hosted the 49ers on Sunday Night Football in the snow in Buffalo, beat them 35-10. 49ers are 5-7. Their season's over. They have nothing left. They're emotionally drained. They're physically drained. McCaffrey injured himself again. Sounds like it's a PCL injury in his knee. He'll probably miss a chunk of time, if not the rest of the season. No real reason for him to come back, in my opinion, but you don't ever know. McCaffrey's a hard worker. But the 49ers are just battered, bruised. Fred Warner's hurt. Debo's been hurt for times. George Kittle's been out. Brock Purdy's been out. Christian McCaffrey's been out. Trent Williams has been out. Like, dude, just for the 49ers this year, just reset, run it back. right? Run it back for next year. Part of going on a championship run is having injury health, luck. They haven't had that this year. It's okay. They still have a bunch of good players. This just isn't it for them this season. Let's dial it back. Start from square one next season. So that's the NFL. That's the podcast. That's the show. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Episode 105 of the We Know Ball podcast. I absolutely enjoyed it. I hope you guys did as well. The last game tonight, by the way, too, for the NFL, Browns playing the Broncos, our Denver Broncos. My fandom lies in the Denver Broncos. And they're hosting the Browns on Monday Night Football. So should be a doozy, should be a good one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode of the We Know Ball podcast, episode 105. Again, my name is Ryan, at Ryan Knows Ball, at We Know Ball Sports, Instagram and TikTok. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast listeners. Making it to the very end. Really appreciate it. We'll be back Thursday for episode 106. And otherwise, as my voice starts to deteriorate, if you can't tell, my goodness. We'll catch you guys on episode 106. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.
We know ball. First and goal. Mahomes flings it. It's there! Hardman! Jackpot! Kansas City! It's over. Time to say it again, Boston. Anything's possible. Banner number 18 has been secured. The Celtics are NBA champions.
I mean, we know that we know ball around here.
Hail, hail, Michigan. They are the champions of college football 2023.
Start the party, Los Angeles! Your Dodgers have won the World Series!
It is a UConn coronation. The Huskies make history. Back-to-back national champions.
Well, we know ball, so